He left her in the hospital, certain the baby wasn't his. 2 years later, he saw a little boy who looked exactly like him. Jackson Harper stood frozen at the entrance of the hospital room, unable to take another step forward. The soft cries of a newborn echoed faintly from inside, but all he could hear were his parents' voices in his head, whispering doubt and certainty with equal weight. His father had told him days ago that Hannah had been seeing someone else behind his back, that the baby she now held couldn't possibly be his. His mother had added just enough emotional pressure to tip him further, reminding him of his career, of the empire he was building, and of how one wrong decision could undo everything. Jackson hadn't wanted to believe it at first, but fear has a way of blinding even the most intelligent man. When Hannah turned her head and saw him standing there, her face lit up, tired, pale, but so full of love and hope that it nearly shattered him. She beckoned him in with her eyes, a silent plea for support, for presence, for belief. But he didn't move. Instead, he stepped back. And then another. Until he turned around and walked out, leaving her holding their newborn alone. As the elevator doors closed in front of him, Jackson felt a weight lift, but it wasn't relief. It was numbness. The kind that creeps in when you've just made a decision you know you'll never be able to take back. Hannah didn't cry when he left. She didn't scream or chase after him. She just looked down at the baby boy in her arms, whose tiny features already showed hints of the man she loved, and now hated. Her heart didn't just break, it unraveled slowly, like a thread pulled loose until all that remained was exhaustion and disbelief. She whispered soft words to the infant, promised him she would protect him, that he was wanted, even if his father refused to see it. In the days that followed, Jackson buried himself in work. He signed deals, held press conferences, and smiled through photo shoots. The tabloids praised his focus, his clarity, his single-minded ambition. No one knew what he had left behind to maintain that image. No one asked. And he never offered. When people brought up Hannah, he dismissed her with a blank look, pretending it had been nothing more than a short-lived mistake. Meanwhile, Hannah moved into a small apartment on the edge of the city. She juggled sleepless nights and endless diapers with freelance work and overdue bills. She grew quiet, inward, and strong in ways she had never imagined she would need to be. Every time she looked into her son's eyes, blue like his father's, she felt a storm of conflicting emotions. She loved him more than life itself. But forgiving Jackson? That was something she couldn't even imagine. Her body healed. Her spirit didn't. She never told Jackson about the long nights at the emergency room, about the first fever, or the first laugh. She never sent photos or texts. If he wanted out, then he would stay out. But deep down, somewhere beneath the anger and the fatigue, a small part of her still waited. Not for him to come back, but for him to realize what he had left. She didn't need him to fix what he'd broken. She just wanted him to see the truth. And the truth, she knew, was growing stronger every single day in the arms of a boy who looked more like his father with each passing hour. 2 years passed, marked not by calendar pages but by sleepless nights, scraped knees, and quiet victories. Hannah's life had reshaped itself around her son, Liam, who had grown from a fragile newborn into a vibrant, curious toddler with a shock of blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that mirrored the very man she had spent so long trying to forget. Each day she woke up before the sun, often to the sound of tiny feet padding into her room, and each night she collapsed into bed after juggling work, parenting, and the heavy silence that settled in once Liam was asleep. Money was always tight. The part-time paralegal work she'd taken after her maternity leave had ended was barely enough to keep them afloat. She supplemented her income with freelance legal research projects she completed late at night, long after Liam was in bed. Her friends had slowly faded away, some unsure of what to say, others too wrapped up in their own lives to notice hers had changed completely. Her parents helped when they could, but they lived in another state and had their own struggles to manage. Hannah didn't talk about Jackson, not to her friends, not to her family, and certainly not to Liam, who was still too young to ask where his father was or why he never came around. But she thought about him more than she wanted to admit. Every time Liam smiled just so, or said something with the same cadence Jackson once used, she felt a quiet ache in her chest. She didn't cry anymore. That part of her had dried up in the first few months after Jackson left. Now she simply carried the loss with her, folded neatly into her days like the small scar on her stomach, a reminder that something had been taken from her. There were moments when the bitterness threatened to swallow her. Especially when she remembered how Jackson had left so easily, with no explanation, no goodbye. He hadn't even held Liam. He had made his decision based on lies told by people who were supposed to protect him. And what hurt the most was that he hadn't questioned them. Not once. He had believed she was capable of betrayal. He had believed their child wasn't his. And he had walked away without looking back. But Hannah didn't let that bitterness show. She couldn't afford to. She had a little boy to raise, and Liam needed joy, not shadows. So she learned to smile again, for him. She took him to the park every weekend, even when she was exhausted. She read him the same bedtime story 6 nights in a row because it made him laugh. She taught him how to say please and thank you, how to tie his shoes, how to be kind. Every milestone he reached, she celebrated like it was the 4th of July. Still, there were hard days when Liam got sick and she had no one to lean on, days when she wondered if she'd ever trust anyone again. Sometimes, late at night, when the world was quiet and her defenses were down, she found herself imagining what might have happened if Jackson had stayed. If he had held his son that day. If he had looked past the lies. But she always pushed those thoughts away. She had stopped believing in second chances. One gray afternoon, she took Liam to the city park after work. He loved the swings, and she loved watching him soar, his tiny sneakers kicking the sky. She sat on the bench with a thermos of lukewarm coffee and a book she didn't plan to read. Liam's laughter filled the air. Then, across the field, she saw him. Jackson. He wasn't dressed like a businessman that day. No suit, no tie, just dark jeans and a wool coat. He looked older, slightly more tired, but unmistakably the same man she had once loved. Their eyes met, and in that split second, she saw something flash across his face, shock, disbelief, maybe even recognition. He stared at Liam, who had just hopped off the swing and was now running toward her with a wide grin. Jackson didn't move. He just stood there, frozen, as if his world had just tilted. Hannah turned away before Liam reached her, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it over the wind. She picked up her son and whispered, "It's time to go, sweetheart," trying to keep her voice steady. That night, as she tucked Liam into bed, she couldn't stop shaking. She didn't know what would come next. She didn't know if Jackson had really seen what she feared, and hoped, he had. But for the first time in 2 years, something had cracked in the wall she had built around herself. And it terrified her. Because if he had seen Liam clearly, if he knew, then everything might change. And after surviving so long on her own, Hannah wasn't sure if she was ready for that kind of earthquake. Jackson couldn't sleep that night. Not after what he had seen in the park. That boy, the way he ran, the way he laughed, the exact shade of his blonde hair, the same piercing blue eyes that stared back at Jackson every morning in the mirror. It had been a split second, but in that moment, something inside him shifted violently. He had always believed he had done the right thing, or at least the necessary thing. His parents had been so sure. The timing didn't add up, they had said. Hannah had been distant. She had smiled at other men. The seed of doubt had been planted, and he had watered it with fear and self-preservation. But seeing that child, so unmistakably his, made all those excuses crumble like dry leaves. He spent hours pacing his apartment, ignoring calls and canceling meetings. His assistant was baffled, unsure why the usually composed and sharp CEO had suddenly gone off the grid. Jackson didn't offer an explanation because he didn't have one. All he had were questions. What had he done? How had he allowed himself to believe such a lie? And most of all, what kind of man leaves his own child without even asking for the truth? By morning, the exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was soul deep. He sat at his kitchen table, staring at an untouched cup of coffee, thinking about the day he walked out of that hospital room. The image came back clearly, Hannah holding their newborn, her eyes full of quiet hope, and him walking away without a single word. He hadn't even looked at the baby. The shame was sudden and blinding. He didn't deserve forgiveness. But he knew, with absolute certainty, that he needed to find them. He needed to see the boy again. He needed to speak to Hannah, even if she slammed the door in his face. It took him 2 days to track her down. She had moved, changed jobs, cut off most mutual contacts. But Jackson had resources, and with each new piece of information, his guilt only deepened. She had lived alone, raised their son with no help, not even child support, because she had never asked. She hadn't tried to punish him, hadn't exposed him in the media, hadn't demanded a thing. She had simply disappeared and endured. When he found the address, he sat in his car for almost an hour, watching the building from a distance. He saw her walk out with Liam, holding his tiny hand as they crossed the street. Liam was chattering excitedly, pointing at things only he could understand, and Hannah smiled at him with a tired tenderness that pierced Jackson's heart. He didn't approach them that day. He couldn't. He wasn't ready, and they didn't deserve to be ambushed. But he started coming back. Every day for a week, he watched from afar. Not because he wanted to invade their privacy, but because he needed to see who they had become without him. Liam was full of life, curious, joyful, fearless. And Hannah, she was no longer the soft-spoken girl he remembered. She was fierce now, focused, and radiant in a way that came not from ease but from survival. Jackson began to realize that by leaving her, he hadn't just missed out on his son's life, he had missed the chance to grow beside a woman who had become something extraordinary. The following week, he finally gathered the courage to speak to her. He waited outside Liam's daycare, timing it carefully. When Hannah emerged with Liam bouncing alongside her, he stepped out of the car slowly and approached. Her eyes locked onto his instantly, and her entire body stiffened. She pulled Liam gently behind her, protectively, like a reflex, and Jackson stopped several feet away, not wanting to cause more damage than he already had. "Hannah," he said, his voice dry from nerves. "Please don't walk away. I need to talk." She looked at him, eyes hard but unreadable. "There's nothing to talk about." "There is," he said quietly. "I saw him. I know. And I didn't know." She exhaled sharply, glancing down at Liam, who was tugging at her coat, unaware of the tension. "That's the problem, Jackson. You didn't want to know." He swallowed, unable to deny it. "I was wrong. They lied to me. My parents." "I don't care what they told you," she interrupted, her voice calm but shaking. "You left. You didn't ask. You didn't even hold him." The silence that followed was heavy. Jackson nodded slowly. "I know. I've lived with that every day since I saw him. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I had to come. I had to say it to your face. I'm sorry, Hannah. I was weak. I was scared. And I believed the wrong people. But he looks just like me. I saw it. I know he's mine." She looked away, eyes glassy, and knelt beside Liam, brushing a leaf from his coat. When she stood again, she didn't say anything for a long time. Then finally, "I don't know what you want from us. But if you're going to be here, really here, you don't get to disappear again." "I won't," he said quickly, too quickly. "You don't get to say that yet," she replied. "We'll see." And with that, she took Liam's hand and walked away, leaving Jackson standing in the chill of the evening, shaken but somehow lighter than he had felt in years. It wasn't hope yet. But it wasn't the end either. The days following their first conversation were fragile, suspended somewhere between uncertainty and quiet possibility. Jackson didn't press. He didn't call or show up unannounced. Instead, he waited, unsure whether he was respecting her space or simply too afraid to risk rejection again. He went back to his routines, but nothing felt the same. The boardroom lost its thrill. The applause at shareholder meetings sounded hollow. Numbers on screens meant little when he couldn't stop thinking about a boy with his smile and a woman who had once trusted him enough to carry their child alone. Hannah, meanwhile, couldn't stop replaying their encounter. She was angry, furious, even, but underneath the anger, there was a strange trembling, not of fear, but of something she didn't want to name yet. Jackson had looked lost, not rehearsed or manipulative. And most disorienting of all, Liam had liked him. He hadn't cried or hidden behind her. He had watched Jackson with open, innocent curiosity, and it haunted her. She wasn't ready to forgive him. She wasn't sure she ever would be. But she also couldn't deny the ache of watching her son unknowingly meet his father for the first time and not recognizing what he'd missed. The following weekend, Hannah sent a short message. It wasn't sentimental. It was careful and clear. If you still want to see him, come to the park at 11 on Saturday. Just you. Jackson stared at the screen for a long time before responding with a simple, "I'll be there." That Saturday, he arrived early. He wore jeans and a gray sweater, trying not to look like a corporate machine. He hadn't known what to bring, so he carried a small toy car Liam might like and a book tucked under his arm, something his mother used to read to him when he was small. When Hannah arrived with Liam bundled in a bright yellow jacket, the boy immediately ran toward the playground. Jackson didn't move, unsure if he was supposed to follow. Hannah stood beside him, arms crossed, not looking at him directly. "Thank you for coming," he said carefully. She nodded, eyes still tracking Liam. "I don't know what this is yet. I just thought, he should have the option to know you. That's it." "I don't want to confuse him," Jackson said. "I just want to be around. Even if it's just as a friend right now." "He doesn't need a friend. He needs a father. Someone who shows up and stays." "I want to be that." "I do." "Then don't say it," she replied. "Show it." Liam ran up just then, sand on his hands and a wide grin on his face. He looked at Jackson and pointed at the swings. "Push me." It was such a simple request, but it landed like a stone in Jackson's chest. He smiled softly and nodded. "Yeah, buddy. Let's go." They walked to the swing set together. Jackson gently helped Liam into the seat and began to push, not too hard, listening as the boy squealed with laughter. Hannah watched from the bench, arms still wrapped around herself, unsure what to feel. Part of her wanted to cry. Another part wanted to get up and walk away. But mostly, she just sat still, because for the first time since Liam was born, she wasn't doing this alone. Over the next few weeks, these visits became a pattern. Jackson came to the park every Saturday. He brought small things, snacks, toys, books, but more importantly, he brought time. He learned how to talk to Liam, how to match his rhythm, how to answer his endless questions. He never rushed. He never made promises he couldn't keep. And slowly, Hannah began to let her guard down, inch by inch. One afternoon, when Liam had fallen asleep in her lap under the sun, she looked at Jackson and asked, "Why didn't you question it? Why was it so easy to believe them?" He didn't dodge it. "Because I was scared. I was selfish. And I didn't want to lose everything I thought I'd worked for. But I lost more than I ever imagined. I see that now." Hannah stared down at her son's face. "He's amazing, you know. You missed so much." "I know," he said quietly. "But if there's still time to learn who he is, even a little, I'll take it." She didn't answer. She just kept holding her son, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to protect him alone. And that, even if she wouldn't say it yet, mattered more than anything. The 5th month of their new rhythm brought a fragile calm, like the first few clear days after a storm. Jackson was no longer a stranger in Liam's life. He still wasn't called Dad, and he never asked to be. But when Liam fell and scraped his knee one afternoon and instinctively reached for Jackson before anyone else, Hannah felt something shift. She had been sitting just a few steps away, fully present, and yet her son had chosen the man who once left before he ever held him. That moment stirred something in her that she didn't want to examine too closely, because if she did, she'd have to acknowledge that Jackson was becoming a real part of their world. And it scared her. Not because she didn't want it, but because she did. And wanting meant risking everything all over again. Jackson felt the change too. He began to anticipate Liam's needs, noticing small things, when he got overwhelmed by noise, when he needed time to wake up before being spoken to, which stories made him giggle. He asked Hannah questions, not just to be involved, but to understand. He didn't try to overstep. He didn't challenge her authority. If anything, he respected it so deeply that sometimes it caught her off guard. And every time she expected him to falter or disappear, he didn't. One day, after a long afternoon at the Children's Museum, Liam fell asleep in the back seat of Jackson's car. They had all gone together. Hannah had insisted on driving separately at first, but Jackson had offered to pick them up so Liam wouldn't have to be shuffled between vehicles. She had reluctantly agreed. After parking outside her apartment, they sat in silence for a while, neither wanting to wake the boy. "Do you ever think," Jackson said softly, not looking at her, "about how different everything could have been if I'd just stayed that night?" Hannah didn't answer right away. She traced a circle on the condensation forming on the window. "Sometimes. But mostly I try not to. What good would it do?" "I think about it all the time," he admitted. "About how I let fear make a decision that cost me everything." Hannah turned slightly in her seat. "You're here now. And he's lucky. But I can't go back and erase those years. I can't unfeel what I went through." "I'm not asking you to," Jackson said. "I'm not here for you to forget. I just want to be worthy of being part of what comes next." Hannah sighed and looked back at her son. "He's everything to me. You hurt both of us, even if he doesn't know it yet." "I know," Jackson said. "I live with it every day. But I'll keep showing up, even when it's hard, even if I don't get everything I want. Because he deserves a father, and you deserve peace." That night, after she carried Liam inside and tucked him into bed, Hannah sat on the couch and let herself cry for the first time in months. Not because she was broken, but because part of her, just a sliver, was beginning to hope again. And that kind of hope is the most terrifying kind of all. As the weeks passed, Jackson began helping in more practical ways. He volunteered to take Liam to his speech therapy sessions once a week, sat through parent-child playgroups, even started cooking Sunday breakfast when they invited him inside. It began with small things, Hannah asking him to grab milk from the store while she changed Liam, or passing him the baby wipes without a word. But over time, those small things grew into habits, and the space he occupied in their lives slowly became less temporary. Liam noticed too. He didn't call Jackson by name anymore, he called him Jay, a nickname born from toddler mispronunciation and carried with affection. Jackson didn't correct it. He wore it like a badge. And then one night, as Liam fell asleep on Jackson's chest during a movie, Hannah looked over and realized her fear had been replaced by something else. She couldn't name it yet. But she no longer braced for him to disappear. She no longer wondered if he was playing a role. He wasn't perfect, but he was real. And real was more than she had thought she'd ever get. It still wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't love. But it was something close. It was the beginning of a life neither of them had planned for, but one both of them were now brave enough to reach for. Autumn settled gently over the city, wrapping the streets in warm gold and rust-colored leaves. The air turned crisp, and Liam began insisting on wearing his favorite little hat with the bare ears, even indoors. It had been nearly 6 months since Jackson re-entered their lives, and while no one had labeled what they had, the routine they'd created was undeniably a shared one. Jackson was there almost every day, picking Liam up from daycare when Hannah had late meetings, reading bedtime stories, attending preschool open houses, and even helping put together a wobbly IKEA bookshelf that had sat half-assembled in Hannah's hallway for nearly a year. He had become a fixture in their home, not as a guest, but something steadier. Yet with the comfort of that routine came complexity. Hannah found herself questioning her own boundaries. Jackson wasn't the same man who had left her in a hospital bed. He was softer now, more thoughtful. He asked before doing anything, and he listened when she spoke. He never interrupted, never defended the version of the past that made him feel better. He owned his mistakes in a way that felt rare and unpolished. And that made it all the more difficult for Hannah to keep him at arm's length. One Thursday evening, after a long workday, Hannah came home to find Jackson and Liam in the kitchen. They were making pancakes for dinner, batter everywhere, flour on the counters, Liam's face streaked with maple syrup and pride. It was chaotic, but it was beautiful. Jackson looked up, a little sheepish, and said, "We got hungry, and someone wanted to help." Hannah didn't scold them. She just laughed, a soft sound that surprised all three of them. That night, after Liam was in bed, she poured 2 cups of tea and sat across from Jackson at the kitchen table. They talked about nothing for a while, about her annoying coworker, about a weird ad Jackson saw on the subway, about what Liam had learned at preschool that week. But as the conversation wound down, Jackson's gaze grew serious. "Do you ever think about what this is?" he asked quietly, not looking directly at her. She stirred her tea slowly. "All the time. I just don't know how to define it yet." "Neither do I," he admitted. "But I know it's not pretend. I know I care about him. And I care about you." "That never really stopped, Hannah." She looked at him then, and her heart did that thing it used to do back when they were younger, when love felt like an open road instead of a collapsed bridge. She wanted to believe him, but part of her was still protecting the version of herself that had been abandoned. "I don't trust easily anymore," she said after a pause. "And I can't promise I'll be able to give you what you're hoping for." "I'm not asking you to promise anything," he said. "Just keep letting me be here. Let me earn it, if I can." And she nodded, because that felt safe. Because it was honest. In the weeks that followed, their dynamic shifted in small but noticeable ways. Hannah started inviting him to stay for dinner without prompting. Jackson brought over Liam's favorite muffins on Monday mornings before work. One Friday, he fell asleep on the couch while reading to Liam, and Hannah covered him with a blanket instead of waking him. The moments were simple, but they added up. They began to share the weight of parenting in ways Hannah hadn't realized she was missing. When Liam got sick with a nasty flu, Jackson stayed up with her through the night, holding a bowl, wiping his son's forehead, running to the pharmacy in the rain without complaint. He didn't just show up, he stayed, through the messy, the exhausting, the real. And Hannah, watching him curled at the edge of her couch at dawn, realized he wasn't doing it out of guilt anymore. He was doing it because he loved their son. Because he loved her. Still, she didn't say those words out loud. Not yet. But the wall between them had begun to crumble, and for the first time in years, she let herself wonder what it might be like if they weren't just co-parents. If they were something more. She wasn't ready to name it. But she didn't turn away from it either. Not anymore. By the time winter arrived, snow blanketing the city in soft silence, their lives had settled into a quiet rhythm that felt almost like family. Jackson had grown into his role with a naturalness that surprised even him. Liam began to expect him, not with hesitation but with delight, small arms reaching up for hugs, proud declarations like "Jay's picking me up today," echoing through preschool hallways. He still didn't call him Dad, and Jackson never asked him to. The name didn't matter. The connection did. For Hannah, the slow transformation was harder to process. She was used to doing things alone. She had survived the sleepless nights, the terrifying illnesses, the empty holidays, all without anyone to lean on. And now here he was, no longer a shadow from her past, but a real man who showed up in ways that were no longer performative. He was part of the routine. And part of her. One evening, just before Christmas, they attended Liam's preschool holiday concert. It was the kind of chaotic event only parents and small children could love: paper snowflakes taped to walls, glitter everywhere, teachers trying to keep 3-year-olds in line while they sang off-key carols. Liam stood proudly in the front row, his reindeer antlers slightly crooked, and Jackson sat beside Hannah, filming the whole thing with a shaky hand and misty eyes. Hannah glanced over at him once, catching the rawness in his expression. That, more than any apology he had ever spoken, told her just how much he'd changed. After the concert, they bundled Liam up and walked to a nearby diner for hot chocolate. Liam chattered about his songs, his classmates, how he was the loudest reindeer, and how Jay had to see him sing again at home. Hannah smiled through it all, sipping her cocoa, occasionally brushing snow from Liam's eyelashes. It was simple. It was ordinary. And that scared her more than anything. Because simplicity was the one thing she'd never had with Jackson before. Later that night, when Liam was asleep in the car seat, Jackson didn't start the engine right away. They sat in silence, the windows fogged slightly from their breath. "I never thought I'd get to have this," he said, not looking at her. "This?" Hannah asked, her voice quiet. He nodded. "Not just being a dad. Being with you too. You've let me in, even when I didn't deserve it." "You didn't," she said honestly. "But you stayed long enough to earn your way back." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, wrapped package. "I was going to wait until Christmas, but I think maybe it's time." Hannah looked at it warily. "What is it?" "It's not what you think. It's not a ring or some dramatic gesture. I know we're not there yet. But I wanted to give you this." She unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a simple photo frame. Inside was a candid shot of Liam on Jackson's shoulders from the park, laughing so hard his face was flushed. On the bottom, engraved into the silver, were the words, "The moment I knew I'd never leave again." Hannah stared at the photo for a long time, her throat tight. "You've changed," she whispered. "I had to," he said. "But more than that, I wanted to." They didn't kiss that night. There were no grand declarations. Just a long, quiet drive back to her apartment. When they got there, Jackson carried Liam upstairs, tucked him into bed without waking him, and turned to go. But at the door, Hannah stopped him. "Do you want to stay for dinner tomorrow?" she asked. "It's just spaghetti, but it's something." Jackson smiled, his heart swelling in a way he hadn't felt in years. "I'd like that." And so it continued, slowly, with no rush, no pressure, no guarantees. Just two people finding their way back to something that had been broken, something that still bore scars, but was healing in a way that neither of them had dared to hope for. For the first time, Hannah stopped bracing for the worst. She allowed herself to believe in what was growing between them. And Jackson, humbled by everything he had once taken for granted, finally understood the depth of what it meant to be part of a family. Not just to love, but to stay. Spring arrived in subtle shifts. The snow melted into soft puddles along the sidewalks, Liam's winter boots were replaced with sneakers, and Hannah found herself opening windows again just to let in the fresh air. It had been almost a full year since Jackson had reappeared in their lives, and the change in all three of them was undeniable. Liam was thriving, confident, happy, and bright. He knew both of his parents now, not just one, and he never questioned that they were both his. He didn't understand the past, and Hannah hoped he never would, not the loneliness, not the betrayal, not the cold silence that once sat between them. All he knew now was warmth. For Hannah, there were still moments of hesitation. Her wounds hadn't disappeared, they had just scarred over in quiet, invisible ways. But Jackson had continued to earn back every ounce of trust. He never missed a school event, never forgot a pickup time, never crossed the invisible boundaries she had drawn in the beginning. Over time, she stopped noticing those boundaries because he stopped needing reminders. He understood her rhythm, her silence, her glances, the weight behind a single look. He knew when to lean in and when to give her space. And that, more than anything, had healed her. One evening, they sat on the front steps of Hannah's apartment, watching Liam blow bubbles across the yard. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue over everything. The light made Jackson's hair appear even blonder, and his eyes softer than she remembered from years ago. Liam laughed and chased the bubbles with his whole body, arms stretched wide like he was trying to catch the entire sky. Hannah smiled, her shoulders relaxed. There had been so much tension between them once, now there was only this quiet contentment. Jackson leaned back on his hands and looked at her carefully. "You know, I used to think my whole life was about achievement. The next big deal, the next title, the next headline. But none of that ever felt like this." Hannah turned to him, her expression open. "Like what?" "Like home," he said simply. "Not a place, but people. You and Liam, you are home." She didn't speak right away. That word, home, meant something different to her. It wasn't soft rugs and warm meals. It was survival. It was long nights alone with a baby and no answers. But she understood what he meant. Because lately, she'd begun to feel the same. The three of them, imperfect, patched together, they had built something strong. Not because it had been easy, but because it had been hard, and they stayed anyway. "I never thought I'd say this," she said, her voice low, "but I'm glad you came back." Jackson looked down, his throat tightening. "I didn't know if I'd ever deserve to hear that." "You don't," she said, but with a smile that softened the words. "But you're here. And that's more than I ever thought I'd get." Liam came running toward them then, collapsing into Hannah's lap in a swirl of giggles and grass-stained knees. Jackson reached over and smoothed his hair back. Liam leaned into the touch without hesitation. It was natural now, unquestioned. Hannah watched the moment, committing it to memory. There had been so many nights she had rocked this boy to sleep, wondering if he'd ever know his father. And now here he was, tangled between the two of them, safe. Weeks later, on a warm April afternoon, Jackson asked if they could go somewhere special, just the three of them. He didn't say why. He just told them to dress comfortably. They drove out of the city, past open fields and winding roads, until they reached a quiet house with a wraparound porch. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't grand. But it was beautiful, with enough space for a child to run and enough quiet for Hannah to breathe. "This was my grandmother's house," Jackson said as they stepped out of the car. "She left it to me when she passed, and I never did anything with it. I didn't know what it was for. Until now." Liam ran through the tall grass like it was his private kingdom. Hannah walked the perimeter slowly, taking it all in, the old swing set, the ivy creeping up the porch, the steady breeze. Jackson joined her after a moment. "I'm not asking for anything," he said, his voice careful. "But I wanted to show you this. Because I want to build a life. Not just moments, not just weekends. I want the whole thing." Hannah looked at the house again, then at him. There was no fear in her this time. No suspicion. Just the quiet certainty that came from time, consistency, and love that had been tested and proven real. "I don't know what the future looks like," she said. "But I'm not afraid of it anymore." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. And in that small moment, under the open sky, with their son's laughter echoing from the trees, what once had broken between them was whole again. Not perfect, not untouched, but whole. And that was enough to begin forever. The ending of this story is powerful because it doesn't rely on dramatic twists or over-the-top redemption. Instead, it leans into something far more meaningful, the quiet rebuilding of trust. Jackson doesn't magically fix everything, he learns to show up, to listen, and to take responsibility. And Hannah, despite everything, allows herself to heal at her own pace, without rushing forgiveness. That feels honest. What makes the ending beautiful is that it's not about returning to who they were before, it's about becoming something new. The boy at the center of it all, Liam, is the thread that ties them together, not just biologically but emotionally. Through him, they both grow into the kind of people they probably never would have become on their own. It's a happy ending, but not an easy one. And that's why it feels earned. A Millionaire CEO said he never wanted a family, until he saw his ex with twin daughters who had his eyes. David Riley had built his empire brick by brick, not with love or support, but with cold precision and relentless ambition. As the CEO of one of the fastest-growing investment firms on the East Coast, he didn't just manage money, he controlled futures. His days began at 5 a.m. with black coffee and ended sometime after midnight with glowing screens and half-read reports. People admired him. Others feared him. Most didn't dare question his decisions. But there was one decision that lingered in the shadows of his towering success, the night he told Anna Lewis he didn't need a family and walked away without a second thought. It had been 3 years, but the words he threw at her that night still echoed in his memory, though he rarely allowed himself to revisit them. "You're just a distraction," he had said, his voice cold and final. "I don't want a family. I want my life." He had shut the door behind her without knowing that she had stood outside that apartment in tears, a hand resting protectively over her stomach, already knowing what he didn't. He had thrown himself into work after that. New buildings, mergers, international deals, he made headlines not for who he was, but for what he accomplished. His board members praised his discipline, his clients admired his detachment. To them, he was unstoppable. But behind the glass walls of his office, David was a man who had made himself untouchable on purpose. He avoided people who reminded him of what he left behind. He surrounded himself with others who talked about markets and metrics, not memories and missed birthdays. One rainy Monday morning, while reviewing quarterly numbers, his assistant walked in with an envelope. "It came by courier," she said, placing it on his desk. He didn't look up. "Just leave it." Hours later, once the office quieted and the rain outside blurred the skyline into a wash of gray, he opened it. Inside was a short, handwritten note. "I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know, I'm doing fine. We're doing fine." No signature. No return address. But he recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Anna's. He stared at the words, heart slowing as if the world had momentarily tilted. He hadn't heard from her in 3 years. There had been no calls, no letters, no social media posts. She had disappeared completely, and he hadn't searched. Part of him thought it was better that way. Cleaner. But something about the note unsettled him. Not what it said, but what it didn't. The plural. "We're doing fine." He tried to dismiss it, tried to file it away in the same mental cabinet where he kept all the other things he chose to forget. But it lingered. That night, while lying alone in his high-rise apartment with the city pulsing below him, David Riley, the man who said he needed no one, couldn't sleep. The next morning, he left for a business trip, another city, another speech, another transaction. His team met him at the airport, but as he walked toward the gate, he caught sight of something, or rather, someone, that stopped him dead in his tracks. There, just past the arrivals line, stood Anna. She hadn't seen him yet. She was kneeling down, speaking gently to 2 small girls who clung to either side of her legs. They couldn't have been more than 3 years old. Both had dark hair that curled slightly at the ends and wide, unmistakable blue eyes, the same blue that stared back at him from the mirror every morning. And in that moment, David understood the meaning of the note. He understood everything. The silence. The finality. The girls were his. And he had missed it all. His legs felt heavy as he stepped forward, the crowd moving around him like ghosts. For the first time in years, David Riley wasn't thinking about the market or the deal waiting in his inbox. He was thinking about the two daughters he had never met. And the woman he had once told to leave because he believed family had no place in his life. He didn't know it yet, but nothing about his world would ever be the same again. David stood frozen at the edge of the terminal, his pulse hammering in his chest as his eyes locked on the scene before him. It wasn't just the shock of seeing Anna again after 3 years, it was the sudden, undeniable recognition in the features of the two little girls at her side. Their hair was the same deep brown as his when he was younger, their blue eyes startlingly familiar, even from a distance. One of them tugged at Anna's dress and whispered something, while the other clung to a pink stuffed animal with a well-worn ear. They were dressed in matching coats and boots, both a little too big, as if handed down or bought in a hurry. They looked up at their mother with the kind of natural, unspoken trust that David had never known, and he felt a slow ache begin to take root in the center of his chest. He could have turned around right then. He could have slipped back into the crowd, boarded his flight, and convinced himself that it was just coincidence. But he didn't. He took a step forward, and then another. His mouth was dry and his mind raced with everything he didn't know how to say. When he was finally within a few feet of them, Anna looked up, and her expression froze. Their eyes met. Her entire body tensed, not with fear, but with preparation. It was clear that she hadn't expected to see him here. Her lips parted slightly, then closed again. She stood, instinctively placing a protective hand on each child's shoulder. David swallowed hard. He wanted to speak, but no words came out. The girls stared at him curiously, as children do when they sense something important happening but don't understand it. One of them leaned her head into Anna's hip and whispered again, louder this time. "Mommy, who is that man?" Anna's expression didn't change. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned to the girls and gently said, "Why don't you go sit on the bench right there? Mommy will be right here." They hesitated, then obeyed, walking over to a row of seats just a few steps away, close enough to hear if they tried. David stepped closer, but slowly, as if any sudden movement might cause everything to collapse. "Anna," he said quietly, his voice unfamiliar to himself. "Are they?" "Yes," she answered before he could finish. "They're yours." The words landed between them like a thunderclap. He stared at her, struggling to process the sentence, but in his heart he had already known it. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her gaze was steady, but there was a faint tremble in her voice when she answered. "Because you made it very clear you didn't want a family. I wasn't going to beg you to change your mind. I didn't want them to grow up wondering why their father resented them. I thought keeping them away would be kinder than letting them grow up unwanted." "I never," he started, but she cut him off. "You said it, David. I remember the exact words, I don't want a family, Anna. I never will. You said it like it was law. So I left. I had no money, no plan. I stayed with a friend until I could get work. I did what I had to do. And I raised them on my own." There was no hatred in her voice, just exhaustion and something else he couldn't quite name. Sadness, maybe. Or disappointment so deep it had turned into detachment. He looked over at the girls again, now playing quietly with the stuffed animal, and felt like an intruder in a life that should have been his all along. "What are their names?" he asked. "Ellie and Clara," she said. "They're 3. Their birthday was last month." He nodded slowly, as if anchoring himself with the facts. "They're beautiful. They're strong," she corrected. "They're kind and smart and stubborn as hell. They've never asked about their dad because I never gave them a reason to think they were missing anything. But I think that's about to change." He looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to meet them. Please. I know I don't deserve it, but... No, you don't, she said bluntly. But that's not really the point, is it? They stood there for a long moment in silence, surrounded by the noise of the airport, the rolling suitcases, the overhead announcements. But everything else had fallen away. David wasn't a CEO anymore. He wasn't a millionaire. He wasn't a powerful man with people waiting to hear his decisions. He was just a stranger to two little girls who had no idea how much he had already failed them. Anna glanced at her daughters and sighed. I'm not saying no. But I'm not saying yes either. You want to meet them? You'll have to do it on their terms. And mine. I will, he said quickly. Whatever it takes. Then start by showing up without running away, she said. Because they've never seen a man disappear, and I don't plan to let that happen now. He nodded again, this time with something closer to understanding. And as Anna walked back to the girls and knelt down between them, David stayed where he was, not ready to follow, not yet invited in. But for the first time in years, he stood still, not out of indecision, but because something real had rooted him to the spot. He had come to the airport expecting to chase a deal. Instead, he found the life he had walked away from 3 years earlier. And as he watched the two little girls smile at their mother, he knew, deep in a part of himself he had long buried, that nothing in his world would ever be more important than earning the right to be part of theirs. David couldn't focus on anything after that day. The image of the girls, his daughters, stayed with him like an imprint on the back of his eyelids. He cancelled meetings, rescheduled flights, and postponed every task that once seemed urgent. For the first time in his career, he let his personal life take precedence, and it wasn't because he wanted to, it was because he couldn't function otherwise. He spent hours pacing his apartment, staring out at the city skyline that used to represent achievement and clarity, now blurred by the fog of his own guilt and confusion. His mind kept replaying the moment Anna confirmed what he had already guessed. They're yours. 3 years. 3 birthdays. First steps, first words, sleepless nights, scraped knees, storybooks, and soft lullabies, all moments he had missed. He hadn't just failed Anna, he had failed them. Not by leaving, but by not knowing. By being so certain that love and connection were distractions, not gifts. He remembered telling himself at the time that he was choosing freedom, focus, and success. But now, with a deeper ache than he knew possible, he realized he had chosen emptiness. He emailed Anna 2 days later, his message direct but not demanding. I'd like to talk again. On your terms. Her reply came the next morning, short but not cold. Saturday. 2 p.m. At the park near 7th and Lincoln. Come alone. Don't be late. That Saturday, he arrived 10 minutes early. He wore casual clothes that felt unnatural on him, jeans and a soft sweater, but he wanted to seem approachable, less like the man who had once slammed a door shut on everything that mattered. The park was quiet, just a few scattered families, a dog walker, and the occasional couple wandering past the benches. At exactly 2 o'clock, Anna appeared. The twins were with her, each holding one of her hands. They were dressed in matching jackets again, this time in soft yellow, and both wore tiny backpacks covered in cartoon animals. Anna led them toward the playground, and David watched as she helped them climb onto the slide. She didn't greet him right away. She let the girls play. He approached slowly and sat on the opposite end of the bench she had chosen. For several minutes, they said nothing. The silence wasn't hostile, just cautious. Finally, she spoke. They think you're someone I used to work with. I didn't know what else to say. He nodded slowly, staring at the twins with a mixture of awe and grief. They're incredible. They're everything, Anna said simply. And they're happy. I need you to understand that. I didn't raise them to feel like something was missing. I didn't want them growing up feeling abandoned. I don't want to take anything from them, he said, his voice careful. I just want to earn a place in their lives, however that has to happen. Anna looked at him then, her eyes sharp but not unkind. And what does that mean, David? You want to visit once in a while? Send gifts? Pay for school and call it parenting? Because I don't need that. They don't need that. If you're serious, it means consistency. It means sacrifice. It means they come first. Every time. I know I don't have the right to ask you for trust, he said quietly, but I'm asking for the chance to build it. Anna turned back toward the playground. Ellie had fallen in the sand and was now brushing off her hands with exaggerated determination. Clara shouted something about the swing. Their laughter carried through the air, light and uninhibited. They deserve someone who doesn't leave when it gets hard, Anna said. So if you want to be a father, don't start by promising anything. Start by showing up. I will, David said, and for the first time in his adult life, he meant it without doubt or condition. They sat in silence again, and after a while, Anna stood. You can walk us home if you want. But keep your distance. Let me handle them. They're not ready to understand yet. He followed from several steps behind as the girls skipped along the sidewalk, chasing each other and asking for snacks. David kept his hands in his pockets and watched everything, the way Anna reached down instinctively to stop Ellie from running into the street, how Clara whined when her shoelace came undone, how Anna crouched to tie it without missing a beat. He observed with admiration and guilt all tangled into one impossible knot. When they reached the apartment building, Anna turned to him. We'll try this. Slowly. But if you disappear again, even once, you're done. No explanations. No redemption. Understood? Yes, he said. Understood. She nodded, then reached into one of the girls' backpacks and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. This is their weekly schedule. Start small. See what they like. Then maybe you can join us at the library next weekend. He took the paper like it was sacred. She didn't say goodbye, just turned and guided the twins inside. David stood on the sidewalk long after the door shut. The street around him bustled with life, cars, conversations, honking horns, but all he could hear was Clara's giggle echoing in his ears. He had started to realize that redemption wouldn't come with a grand gesture or apology. It would come with every early morning, every walk in the park, every quiet moment he was allowed to witness. And for the first time in his life, David Riley, the man who had sworn he didn't need a family, found himself hoping for nothing more than the chance to finally be one. David spent the next few days studying the paper Anna had handed him as if it were the blueprint to a life he had never known he wanted. It was filled with handwritten notes about the girls' daily routines, what time they usually woke up, which snacks they liked, which books Clara always chose for bedtime, and how Ellie sometimes got scared of loud noises. There was even a small sticky note on the back that read, Library Saturdays 10 a.m. story time, if they're in the mood. It wasn't just information. It was a glimpse into the world he had been locked out of. A map into the hearts of two children he had missed completely. And he knew that if he got even one step wrong, he could lose the fragile thread Anna was offering him. The following Saturday, he arrived at the library at 9:45 a.m., unsure of whether they would come. He stood in the corner near the children's section, pretending to browse books about parenting, though the words didn't register. He was painfully aware of how he stood out among the mothers and fathers who looked like they had always belonged here, laughing easily, crouching beside their toddlers, talking about snacks and potty breaks and favorite puppets. At exactly 10, Anna appeared with Ellie and Clara. Both girls wore matching coats with flower patches and carried small backpacks shaped like animals. Ellie's was a bunny, Clara's was a bear. David's breath caught in his throat at the sight of them. They were chatting to each other, already excited, and Anna held their hands loosely as she scanned the room. When she saw him, her expression didn't soften or tighten. It simply acknowledged him. She gave the slightest nod and walked over. They know your name now, she said in a low voice, not looking at him directly. I told them you were someone special they were going to get to know. Don't push. Don't force anything. David crouched down so he was at eye level as the girls approached. Hi Ellie. Hi Clara, he said gently. They stared at him, unsure but not afraid. Clara tilted her head. You're the guy from the park, she said with certainty, as if identifying a puzzle piece. You followed us home. David smiled, surprised by her sharpness. I did. I wanted to be near you. Ellie stepped behind Anna's leg, watching him from the side. Are you Mommy's friend? David paused. I'm learning how to be. And I hope I can be your friend too. Neither girl responded directly, but they followed Anna into the reading circle. David didn't sit with them but stayed nearby, within view. He watched as the librarian animated the story, using big hand gestures and funny voices, and saw Clara laugh out loud while Ellie rested her cheek against Anna's shoulder, eyes wide and sparkling. After story time, Anna took the girls to pick out books, and to David's surprise, Clara tugged on his sleeve. Come help me pick a funny one. It was the first time she'd reached for him voluntarily. He followed her to the shelves, crouching beside her while she pulled out one book after another, explaining why each cover was too boring or too babyish. She finally chose one about a talking dog who owned a bakery and proudly handed it to him. We'll read this next time. Ellie wasn't as quick to warm up, but she didn't avoid him either. When it was time to leave, she looked up and quietly said, Bye, David. It wasn't much. But it was enough to make his chest tighten with something dangerously close to hope. Anna didn't speak much on the walk back to their apartment, but when they reached the front door, she turned to him. They didn't cry. They didn't resist. That's something. He nodded, unsure what to say that wouldn't sound like begging. But then she added, There's a park near here. We go sometimes after school on Fridays. We'll be there next week. If you want. I'll be there, he said immediately, not caring how eager he sounded. That week, he rearranged his entire work schedule to be free Friday afternoon. His assistant raised an eyebrow but didn't question it. For the first time, David left his office in the middle of the day without guilt. He arrived at the park early again, this time bringing a small bag filled with coloring books and crayons. It wasn't much, but it felt like an offering. A beginning. When the girls saw him, Clara ran over without hesitation. Ellie was slower, more observant, but eventually joined them. Anna sat on a nearby bench, watching, silent but present. David sat in the grass with the girls, helping them color. He listened as they argued about which princess had the best dress, and laughed when Clara got purple marker all over her fingers. At one point, Ellie leaned against him briefly, resting her small head on his arm. It lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to send a surge of emotion through him so strong he had to look away to keep from crying. Later, as they packed up, Anna said quietly, They're asking questions now. About you. About why you weren't around before. David swallowed hard. I'll answer whatever they ask. I won't lie. She nodded. Then you'd better be ready. Because they don't forget anything. That night, David sat alone in his apartment, surrounded by silence that no longer comforted him. He looked at the drawings the girls had given him, scribbles and crooked hearts, and pinned them to his fridge. The silence was no longer emptiness. It was waiting. It was a space slowly being filled by laughter, questions, forgiveness, and maybe, eventually, love. The questions came sooner than David had expected. It started with Clara, who was always the more curious of the two. One quiet afternoon at the park, after he had pushed them both on the swings and handed out apple slices, Clara tugged on his sleeve and asked, Why didn't you live with us when we were babies? Her voice wasn't accusing, it was simply full of the direct, innocent honesty only children possessed. Ellie watched closely from her seat on the slide, holding her breath, her wide blue eyes fixed on David as if the shape of his answer could change something fundamental in her world. David felt the weight of that moment press into his chest. Anna had warned him that it would come, but no preparation could make it easier. He crouched down so he was eye level with Clara and spoke carefully, every word measured, not to protect himself, but to protect them. "I didn't know about you," he said quietly. "I didn't know you existed, and that was my fault. I said things to your mommy that made her believe I wouldn't want to know. And she was right to be afraid I might leave. But now I know you, and I'm never going to leave again." Clara blinked at him, seeming to absorb the answer, then reached out and gently touched his face. "You have the same eyes as us." David smiled and nodded. "I noticed that too." Ellie didn't say anything at the time, but when they walked home later, she reached up and took his hand without looking at him, and that quiet gesture felt more powerful than anything she could have said. Over the next few weeks, David became a more permanent presence in their lives. He showed up every Friday at the park, joined them for Saturday story time, and began helping with small weekend errands, grocery runs, trips to the pharmacy, waiting in line at the bakery just to buy the cupcakes Clara liked. Slowly, the girls stopped asking if he was coming and started assuming he would be there. They told him jokes that didn't make sense, showed him their scribbles with pride, and once even tried to put makeup on his face while he was napping on the couch. David let them, laughing through the smears of glitter and lip gloss, because the sound of their giggles was more valuable than any deal he had ever closed. He and Anna still kept things cautious. Their conversations were short, focused on logistics, but they no longer carried the weight of accusation. There was tension, of course, years of resentment and silence didn't disappear overnight, but there was also a growing layer of mutual effort. They were coexisting, parenting, and beginning to rebuild something that didn't have to look like the past. One evening, while the girls were asleep on the couch after a particularly exhausting day at the zoo, Anna sat beside David with 2 mugs of tea. The silence between them was comfortable for the first time in years. She finally spoke, her voice low. "They adore you, you know. I didn't think it would happen so fast. I didn't expect it to feel this normal." David looked down at the twins, one sprawled across a pillow, the other still clutching a stuffed penguin, and felt something unfamiliar, peace. "Neither did I," he said. "I don't deserve how easily they forgive." Anna took a sip of tea, her eyes on the girls. "They don't know what you did. They just know how you make them feel now. Kids live in the present, not the past. But that means you have to keep showing up. Every single day." "I will," he said, and meant it more deeply than anything he'd said in his life. "I don't want to miss a second more." She looked at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. "I used to think you'd never be capable of this," she said honestly. "Of caring. Of being selfless. Of not running from love." "I used to think that too," he replied. "I thought ambition and family couldn't live in the same world. I thought needing people made me weak. And now? Now I know I was afraid," he said. "Afraid that if I let someone close enough, they'd see the parts of me I didn't want to admit were broken." Anna didn't answer, but she didn't argue either. She leaned back against the couch and closed her eyes for a moment. The girls stirred slightly in their sleep, and instinctively, both David and Anna reached to adjust their blankets. Their hands brushed. Neither moved away. In that small, quiet moment, something shifted. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't a promise. But it was the soft sound of walls beginning to fall. David left late that night, his heart heavy and full at the same time. When he got home, he stood at the doorway of his apartment and looked at his pristine, cold space. Then he went into the guest room, now filled with toys and extra blankets, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at a drawing Clara had made that afternoon. It showed 4 stick figures, all holding hands. Above them, in clumsy letters, she had written, "My family." David touched the paper gently, and for the first time in his life, he realized that family wasn't about what you said you wanted. It was about who you showed up for when it mattered most. The following weeks unfolded with a kind of rhythm David had never known before, one that didn't rely on meetings, deadlines, or boardroom strategy, but on early morning wake-ups, coloring sessions on the floor, small scraped knees, and the warm, soft trust of two little girls who were learning to make space for him in their lives. Every moment was still new, still fragile, but the cracks were beginning to fill in. He wasn't perfect. He sometimes brought the wrong snack or forgot that Ellie didn't like loud noises. He had to learn how to braid hair and explain why some cartoons were only for later, even though Clara insisted otherwise. But he tried. And in that trying, something inside him softened. Anna noticed it too. She never said it outright, but David could see it in the way her tone changed when she spoke to him, in the way she no longer double-checked his every move with the girls. She trusted him, slowly, cautiously, but trust was growing, piece by piece, between all of them. He had earned a set of keys to their building. He was invited in without hesitation. The girls now shouted his name when they saw him. Clara liked to climb into his lap and tell long, meandering stories that made no sense but demanded full attention. Ellie often sat beside him during quiet moments, leaning her shoulder into his without saying a word, her presence deliberate and grounding. One Friday evening, Anna invited him to stay for dinner. It was the first time she'd offered without the girls prompting it. They ate spaghetti and meatballs around a cluttered table with mismatched plates and tiny forks, and David felt more at home in that chaos than he ever had in the pristine silence of his penthouse. After the girls went to bed, still giggling from the story he had read them, Anna sat with him on the couch and poured 2 glasses of wine. They talked about parenting and the bizarre things kids said and did. Then the conversation shifted, as it always threatened to do, toward the past. She asked him if he remembered the night they ended. He did. Not because he wanted to, but because it never stopped echoing in his memory. He remembered how cold he had been, how final his words were, and how she had looked at him then, not with anger, but with quiet devastation. "I was scared," he admitted. "Not of being with you. Of failing you. Of becoming someone I didn't know how to be." Anna looked at him for a long time before responding. "You didn't fail me. You failed yourself." Her words didn't carry accusation. They held truth, the kind that pierced and healed at the same time. He nodded, unable to deny it. "I think part of me always knew that walking away wasn't strength. It was fear dressed up as confidence." "And now?" she asked softly. "Now I'm tired of being afraid," he said. "I'm tired of running from love because it doesn't come with guarantees. You and the girls, you scare me in ways that matter. Because I care. And I don't want to go another day pretending I don't." The air between them changed, not suddenly, but like something had shifted enough to be noticed. She didn't move closer, didn't smile or touch his hand, but she didn't pull away either. That was enough. As he left that night, Ellie woke up and stumbled out of her room, sleepy and confused. David crouched down and picked her up, and instead of asking for her mother, she wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered, "Stay tomorrow." The next morning, he was there before they even woke up. What began as awkward, quiet Saturdays turned into full days spent together, pancake breakfasts, park visits, movie afternoons with popcorn scattered on the couch, and eventually, quiet evenings where all 4 of them sat in the living room, playing board games and laughing like they had always been a family. David bought 2 car seats for his car. He started carrying emergency snacks and extra hair ties in his glove compartment. He began to schedule meetings around ballet classes and school visits. Without realizing it, his calendar became full of things that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with meaning. He didn't talk about work much anymore, not because it wasn't important, but because it didn't define him the way it once had. People at the office noticed. His assistant joked that he had started smiling more, that he even laughed without being prompted. He didn't mind the teasing. He didn't even mind when his board started asking if he was considering stepping back a little. The truth was, he already had. Not because he was burned out, but because for the first time, he had something better to do. One evening, as the girls were falling asleep after a long day in the city, Clara whispered, "You feel like home now." He sat there long after they drifted off, holding on to that sentence like a lifeline. Because no title, no net worth, no company success had ever given him that feeling. Only them. Only this. And somewhere deep inside, David began to believe that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to become the kind of man they already believed he was. David's routine, once defined by market openings and board meetings, now revolved around juice boxes, nap times, and tiny shoes left by the front door. The more time he spent with Clara and Ellie, the more deeply embedded he became in the details of their lives, the details he had once overlooked in pursuit of success. He had come to know every shade of their moods, every favorite cartoon character, every silly dance they performed in the middle of the living room just to make him laugh. Their laughter became the soundtrack to his days. It wasn't always easy. The girls had tantrums, refused vegetables, got sick, had nightmares, but through it all, David stayed. And that staying became the foundation of something real. Anna had started inviting him more regularly, even asking for help with school registrations, doctor appointments, and last-minute babysitting when her work schedule shifted. She worked long hours as a freelance graphic designer, and David respected how hard she'd fought to hold everything together. He admired her in a way he never had when they were younger, not just for her beauty or her spirit, but for her resilience, her ability to raise 2 children on her own and still find the strength to open the door for him again. One evening, Anna came down with the flu. David offered to take the girls for the weekend, and though she hesitated, clearly struggling with the idea of letting him care for them alone, she eventually agreed. He brought them to his apartment, now fully transformed with tiny beds, stuffed animals, and finger paintings on the refrigerator. He made pancakes that morning, burned the first batch, got syrup in his hair, and accidentally dropped an egg on the floor, but Clara told him he was the best pancake man in the world, and Ellie gave him a sleepy hug that he felt all the way to his bones. That night, while the girls were asleep, David stood in the hallway just outside their room, listening to their soft breathing. The apartment was quiet, not empty, but alive in a way it had never been before. He didn't miss the silence that used to dominate his space. He didn't miss the sterile elegance of his former life. What he felt now was a quiet fullness, a belonging he had never known he needed. The next morning, Anna sent a message, "Thank you. I slept for the first time in days. The girls keep talking about your pancakes." He replied with a picture of the second attempt, still lumpy, still slightly overcooked, but shaped like smiley faces, and a simple message, "We missed you." A few days later, Anna invited him to join them for a parent-child day at the girls' preschool. David wasn't sure what to expect, but when he arrived, Clara ran into his arms without hesitation, shouting to her friends, "My daddy's here." He froze for a second, heart swelling, before wrapping her in a hug that felt like a promise. Ellie was more reserved, but she took his hand as they walked toward the classroom and didn't let go. During the activities, painting, building towers out of blocks, and singing silly songs, David noticed the way other parents looked at them. Some recognized him, a few whispered, clearly aware of who he was. He ignored it. All he cared about was Clara tugging at his sleeve to show him her glitter-covered drawing and Ellie leaning her head on his shoulder during story time. The teacher later told him, "They talk about you all the time now. It's like you've always been here." He smiled, blinking back the unexpected sting in his eyes. After that, things began to shift even more. The girls stopped calling him David. It was Clara who tried it first, hesitantly, like testing out a word. "Daddy, can I have juice?" He had turned to her in surprise, and she'd immediately looked unsure. "Is that okay?" she asked. He nodded, barely able to speak, and pulled her into his arms. "That's more than okay." Ellie followed not long after, whispering it at first, then louder, until it became her new normal. The sound of that word, "Daddy," coming from their lips was enough to erase years of emptiness. Anna noticed too. One night, as they all sat watching a movie together, Clara curled up on David's lap, Ellie nestled under a blanket with her head on Anna's shoulder. Anna looked over at him. Their eyes met, and there was a depth in her gaze that hadn't been there before. Not quite forgiveness, but something near it. She reached out, brushed a stray curl from Ellie's face, and said quietly, "I never thought I'd see this." He responded just as softly, "Neither did I." A few days later, David took the girls out on his own for the first time, to a small amusement park just outside the city. He'd hired security discreetly, made sure everything was safe, but the girls never noticed. They just screamed with joy on the mini roller coaster, begged for cotton candy, and made him ride the spinning teacups 3 times in a row. As they sat on a bench sharing a sticky snack, Clara turned to him and said, "You're not going to leave again, right?" Her voice was light, but the question held weight. David took her small hand in his and looked at both girls. "Never," he said. "I'm here. For always." It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. And the truth of it, spoken out loud, felt like something sacred. Something earned. He had once believed that success was measured in profits and power, but now he knew the real success was in that promise. In the trust of a child's hand holding his, believing that he would stay. And in that moment, David Riley knew with absolute certainty that he was no longer just a man trying to be a father, he was one. Completely, unapologetically, and forever. The change didn't come with a dramatic confession or a romantic gesture. It happened slowly, as all meaningful change does, in the quiet ways David and Anna began to look at each other, in the way their conversations grew longer after the girls went to sleep, and in how their laughter returned, not forced or nostalgic, but real and present. Trust, once broken and buried beneath years of silence, had begun to grow again between them. There was no official moment when things turned romantic, no declaration of love whispered under candlelight. But one evening, after putting the girls to bed, Anna sat beside David on the couch and rested her head on his shoulder. He didn't speak, didn't move, just placed his hand over hers, and they sat like that for almost an hour. It was enough. It was everything. By spring, David had started spending entire weekends with the girls. He picked them up from preschool when Anna needed to work. He learned how to do their hair the way they liked it, 2 braids for Clara, a single ponytail with a sparkly clip for Ellie. The girls no longer hesitated when they saw him, they ran to him with open arms, shouting, "Daddy," like it had always been that way. David still had work, his firm didn't disappear, but he had stepped back in a way that shocked his colleagues. He handed off responsibilities, allowed himself to be replaced at the podium, and for the first time in his career, didn't care that someone else was speaking in his place. His board didn't understand at first. They thought he was losing focus, that he might be planning a quiet exit. But what he had found with Anna and the girls wasn't an exit. It was the life he never knew he could build. Anna watched all of it carefully. She didn't rush. She didn't forgive him completely overnight. But slowly, she let him back in. Not because he begged, but because he proved himself again and again through actions, not words. There were still nights when old wounds flared up between them. Arguments about the past surfaced sometimes, sudden and sharp, but they always ended with quiet apologies and long talks in the kitchen over cold tea. The foundation they were building now was real, earned, not promised. One Sunday, after a long day at the beach with the girls, Anna invited David to stay for dinner. They made tacos together while the girls played dress-up in the living room. Anna leaned against the counter and watched him slice vegetables with surprising skill. She smiled, tired but content. "You're not bad at this," she said. He looked up, grinning. "I've been practicing." "That's what makes the difference," she said softly. "You practice. You try." That night, as they cleaned up and the girls fell asleep still wearing mismatched princess dresses, David stood by the doorway, unsure whether to leave or stay. Anna walked over, looked up at him, and said quietly, "You don't have to keep leaving." He didn't answer with words. He stepped closer, wrapped his arms around her, and held her for a long time. She didn't pull away. Weeks later, David sat with the girls on the floor of his apartment, surrounded by building blocks and puzzle pieces. Clara was telling him about her imaginary bakery, and Ellie was drawing a picture of their family. She showed it to him proudly. It had 4 stick figures, 2 tall, 2 small, standing beneath a rainbow. Above it, she had written, "Home." David looked at the drawing and then at his daughters, both of them watching him with matching blue eyes full of love and mischief. He felt a quiet awe fill his chest. Not long ago, he had been a stranger to them. Not long ago, he had been a man running from connection, from responsibility, from the terrifying vulnerability of being needed. Now, he was someone they called when they were scared. Someone who knew how to make them laugh. Someone they trusted to show up, again and again. Later that evening, Anna joined them on the floor. They talked about summer plans, the girls' new obsession with camping, and how they might all take a weekend trip together. It felt ordinary. It felt extraordinary. As night settled around them and the city lights flickered in the distance, David realized that this was the life he had built, not by chasing it, but by slowing down long enough to let it grow. The man who once believed he had no place in a family now knew better. He hadn't lost everything that night he closed the door on Anna years ago, he had paused it. And somehow, impossibly, life had given him the chance to press play again. Not from the beginning, but from the middle, where real stories live. The stories with mistakes and repair, with growth and grace, with joy that is messy and imperfect and unforgettable. David Riley wasn't just a father now. He wasn't just a partner or a man who had made amends. He was a man who finally understood what it meant to love with both hands open, and to stay. In my view, the ending of this story strikes a powerful emotional chord because it doesn't rely on grand gestures or unrealistic resolutions. Instead, it leans into something more human, slow growth, honest effort, and quiet redemption. David's journey isn't about sudden transformation, it's about learning to show up, every day, for the people he once pushed away. That's what makes the conclusion feel earned. What I appreciate most is that the story doesn't pretend forgiveness comes easily or that love automatically returns after betrayal. Anna's caution, the children's gradual trust, and David's humility all reflect the complicated beauty of real healing. By the end, he isn't perfect, but he's present. And sometimes, presence is more powerful than perfection. It's a story about second chances, not the kind that fall into your lap, but the kind you have to build with your bare hands. And in that, it's quietly, deeply hopeful.